And now I'm thinking, could this be my best game so far in 2024? I'll let you guys be the judges. First of all, look at these stats, you guys. 97% accuracy with 0 blunders, 0 mistakes, and 0 inaccuracies. Who am I? Hans or Ikaru? So I had white pieces and I started with pawn to d4. By the way, I'm beginning to love the queen pawn game. I think this is an opening for big boys, and it kinda locks your opponent into a limited space due to its closed nature. The problem with most e4 openings is that, one, they oftentimes lead to open positions, and so you have to be very sharp. For example, if you play something like this coach gambit where you will play an early pawn to d4, you have to prepare for war, be ready to attack and strategize. But today's video is about the queen's pawn game. I highly advise that if you are an advanced player, you should look into this if you want to have positional games. My opponent was a 2166 rated player, I should say, and he started with e6, the Howist defense, and then I played c4. He played d5, transposing to the queen's gambit declined, and now I simply played knight f3. Why? Because my former coach told me that knight f3 is always a right move to begin with in the opening stage. So if you still debate on which knight should be developed first between the king's knight and the queen's knight, of course the answer is the king's knight, even in the king's pawn game. My opponent played knight f6. By the way, if he took on c4, I could have played queen a4 check and win that pawn if I wanted to, or just go pawn to e3 and attack that pawn like this, some high level stuff. But anyways, knight f6, and then I played knight c3, starting with my 2 knights first. This is what you want to do even in real OTB tournaments against anyone, playing standard chess and hope to fight in the middle game and in the end game. Forget about checkmating your opponents very early in the opening stage. It doesn't work against higher rated opponents. Bishop e7 was played, though I was expecting bishop b4. In fact, bishop e7 is the top played move in the Masters database, as you can see down below. So you see bishop e7, so my opponent was playing theory as well. And then what did I do? Here I played the first surprise move of the game, which I believed my opponent wasn't going to expect, pawn to g4. Kind of the Shabalov attack if you think about it. Why playing g4 now? Let me explain. You see, I was just waiting for black to develop their dark squared bishop so that the moment it stops guarding the g7 pawn, I could now go pawn to g4. So what's the catch? The idea is I'm temporarily sacrificing the g4 pawn so that after knight takes g4, which happened in the game, now I can pin that knight to the g7 pawn, and there's little or nothing that black can do to save that pawn in this position. But ask, why playing like this? Guys, at times chess is more psychological than physical. Chess is a mind game. So you don't just want to be playing like a robot. You want to psychologically confuse your opponent right from the word go. Remember, when you're playing the queen's pawn game or the queen's gambit, your opponent thinks it's going to be a boring positional game with lots of maneuvers and quiet moves. But that's when you want to prove them wrong and start attacking right away. With rook g1, I'm preventing black from castling short in the long run, and that'll make it so difficult for them to even castle long because they already opened their queen side. So my opponent played knight f6 because what else can they do? And this is when I took on g7. So now I know there's no castling short. We are just going to be fighting. At this point, my opponent played pawn to c6. For some reason, I expected to see something like knight c6, of course. Sorry, knight c6 or knight bd7, that's more natural. But once again, what can they do? With c6, my opponent thought of transposing back to some kind of the semi-Slav with that triangle of pawns, because they thought I was more interested to take on d5. After this, I simply played the best move according to Stockfish, unknowingly knight e5. Now you see the other reason of capturing on g7 with your rook. How is black going to defend the f7 pawn? Oh, maybe with rook f8, which my opponent didn't play. Because if rook f8, by the way, I was just planning to go bishop h6 or bishop g5. Even pawn to e4 is playable in this position. For example, let's say bishop g5, putting more pressure on this knight. If knight bd7, attacking my rook, well, I'm just going to trade off, and after queen takes, go go rook takes h7. The whole idea is to remain with the passed pawn along the h file, or just oversimplifying things on the king side so that I can later on castle long and continue attacking. Or say if this didn't happen and let's say black played knight bd7, again I was just going to play something like e3. Remember, the whole purpose of the queen's pawn game is to be solid positional while also attacking. If knight takes, I just take back with my d pawn. This time if knight h5, I just take with my queen. If knight d7, I can take if I want to, that's okay, because I know I'll take the a7 pawn. But to be more positional, I would have considered bishop f4, holding on to my pawn, and there's nothing that black can do to attack my rook, by the way. Maybe say d takes c4, because what else? Here I would have just taken with my bishop, say queen b6, attacking my b2 pawn. I have queen c2 followed by castle long, or simply tricking black into this kind of a trap where I play knight a4 in an effort to trap their queen. And look at this, the queen is trapped. However, after I took on g7 back on move 7 and then black played c6, knight e5, my opponent did not play rook f8 but knight bd7, forgetting I had knight takes f7. Why taking with the knight, not taking with the rook? Well, if I took with the rook, I was going to lose one of the bigger pieces, probably the rook, after knight takes e5. So you still need to use your brains. Knight takes f7 was attacking two things, the rook and the queen, and black had to do something about their queen. They played queen a5, after which I just gladly took the rook. Look what I'm doing now. My opponent played knight h5, the move that I talked about earlier, attacking my rook. I saw this coming, but I just gave a check on g8. What else do I know? And so my opponent blocked this check with their elbow with their bishop, and then I simply played the top engine move once again, pawn to e4. What am I talking about? With e4 I was simply attacking the knight, by the way, if you are confused, and then my opponent played knight hf6, attacking my rook. Then guess what I did? In 1 second, I found the top engine move that motivated me to make this video. Let's just say I give you 5 seconds to find my next move. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how you play in classical tournaments. Let's go. In this position, I played bishop g5, sacrificing my rook on g8. If nothing was going to be done about that, I was simply going to play pawn to e5 or just taking the knight right away. My opponent did what you're thinking right now, taking the free rook, but that hanged mate in 1 with queen h5, mate. Now what is more impressive about this is this was a bullet match, 1 minute bullet match. And believe it or not, I made all these moves in 30 seconds. And the game only lasted for 14 moves. Later, I had to analyze this with Stockfish. It gave 97% accuracy, only 3% from perfection. But before I proceed, what's wrong with your eyeballs? Can't you see the subscribe button, you guys? Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more exciting videos. And also support my partners, these guys, the Ask Chess GPT group that sponsored this video. It's just a YouTube channel that allows you to ask them questions directly to get video responses or video answers. If you have a chess related question, simply head over to the comment section. You will find the link that will direct you to the community chat where you can ask anything related to chess and expect to get video responses as soon as possible. Anyway, so once again, I highly advise to consider playing the Queen's Gambit featuring the pawn to g4 stuff, which is the Shabalov attack. Remember, the game started as a Queen's Gambit declined game where I started with my 2 knights first because I didn't know what black was up to. And all this time, all I was waiting for was for black to develop the dark square bishop to any of these highlighted squares. And the moment that happened, that's when I thought of playing pawn to g4 because the bishop stopped guarding the g7 pawn. This is just a little trick you can try on your opponents, especially in classical chess. That's how you play positional chess while confusing your enemies. Another way you can play this strategy is in the semi-Slav defense, where you start with d4 and say after pawn to d5 this time, you still go pawn to c4, say c6. As always, which knight should you develop first between these two, the king's knight or the queen's knight? Well, it's the king's knight because it's more flexible, just delaying the move bishop b4 in the near future. Anyways, most of your opponents will play knight f6 by this time, and then you simply go knight c3, starting with your 2 knights first, as always. So now I'm showing you what to do in serious tournaments if you really want to be winning more games. These are openings that you play against higher rated opponents. You're not going to checkmate any higher rated opponent in 8 moves or 10 moves. It doesn't work. You're not going to win with simple tactics in the opening stage. People have really improved in chess, trust me. By this time, your opponents will play e6, introducing the semi-Slav, as you can see, which is just this triangle of pawns. And then you have a couple of options to consider. You can play bishop g5 if you want to play your own games, or pawn to e3 right away, or queen c2. It all depends on your test. I love queen c2 in this position, just kind of stopping knight e5. And here the theoretical move is knight b7, which is the top played move in the Masters database. Now at this stage of the game, your opponent thinks you just want to be solid and positional as white, but you have a surprise. After pawn to e3, they'll probably develop their dark squared bishop to any of these highlighted squares. The top played move is bishop d6, and the moment you notice that they have stopped guarding the g7 pawn, this is when you want to attack that pawn indirectly by playing rook g1. But first, you sacrifice your g-pawn. And now this is officially called the Shabalov attack, a very famous attack at high level chess. If black takes, the whole idea is to go rook g1 once again. And I should mention to say the only move you don't want to entertain is pawn to h4. Forget about this move. h4 will leave many weaknesses. Now, after knight f6, of course, the idea is to take on g7. This is good for white. It's good for your eyeballs and your neck. Rook g8 is impossible due to rook takes, knight takes, and you're going to win a free pawn on h7. That's why queen e7 is the top played move in this position. But now you just go bishop d2. The whole idea is to castle long. If queen f8 attacking your rook, the best place to put your rook is on g2, also protecting your h2 pawn in advance. Of course, if rook g8, you just exchange rooks and castle long, you are very safe and you have an active position. They might play queen g4 in this position, trying to be relevant in society, but you have bishop e2 defending your knight. It was attacked. Okay, at this point, black could be asking for a queen trade, but when you have a superior position, you don't have to trade off your queen. In all honesty, you can play something like e4 in this position. If pawn takes, the idea is not to take back immediately. These are tactics I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen. You can just go rook g1, attacking the bigger piece, and after something like queen f5, you simply go rook g5, almost trapping that queen. If queen h3, yep, that's when you take back on e4, playing positional chess while ensuring that you are on top of things. Attacking knight f6, queen d3, you're going to hide your king on c2 and all that. This is interesting. Bishop d7, c5. What about bishop takes h2? Oh, adorable. You simply have bishop f1, and after queen h6, you simply go rook g8 check plus discovery on the queen. And that's what we mean by playing positional chess in serious tournaments. Now, back in the semi-Slav defense, if you want to know what to do if black plays the correct move in this position, unlike knight g f6, say this time black plays queen f6, the correct move. Point is they are attacking your knight. Well, the simplest you can do is just to exchange everything. This is all you wanted, right? And then take on g7. If black ever thinks they can take a free pawn on h2, you always have rook takes h7, oversimplifying things. Also attacking the bishop. After rook takes, you go queen takes h7. You're just one move away from giving a check. In the long run, you're going to castle long, probably after bishop d2 and knight e2. Or first you play c5 to close the position. Sometimes after rook takes h7, if black plays a more computer move like queen f6, or you just continue with your plans to castle long, bishop d2. You know what happens if takes, you just take back with your queen. If bishop d6, to oversimplify things, you just take the rook, and after queen takes, you castle long. That's the whole purpose. And say knight f6, what are you supposed to do with this pawn? In all honesty, you always want to take on d5 when you're playing the queen's pawn game, not really playing c5, closing the position. The problem with c5 is that it permits black to play moves like e5 in the near future once they retreat their bishop, and you just give up the whole center. So always think of taking on d5 when you're playing the queen's pawn game. It opens up some lines that are critical. Here they take with the e pawn, and then you go pawn to e4. That's the whole idea. So c takes d5, pawn to e4. If pawn takes, you take back with your knight. If this, you take the bishop with check and then grab that free piece. So they'll probably take with their knight, and then imagine you're having this position in a real classical tournament. And you see here, what I would do is to play a fancy move. Positionally speaking, I think bishop a6 is great. First, I know that black doesn't have bishop d5. The bishop is pinned to the king, and if pawn takes, I take on c6, trying to win the rook. There's king e7, but I have bishop g5 check. After pawn to f6, I have queen b7 check. If bishop d7, I have rook e1 check. So it's all about giving checks. If king f7, only sensible move, I take everything. Here is the second game that I had immediately after winning that brilliant game with 97% accuracy. With this one, I played at 94% accuracy. You can check on Stockfish. Again, I started with d4, and after d5, I played c4, the queen's gambit. You know the idea. After e6, transposing to the QGD, I played knight f3, developing my king's knight first, as always. Knight f6, then knight c3, starting with the two knights in the opening. Then after bishop b4, remember in the previous game, my opponent played bishop e7, and then I played pawn to g4. But guess what? After bishop b4, pinning my knight, I still played g4 because I don't listen. Anyway, I knew if knight takes, I was just going to pin their knight, once again doing the same trick. But my opponent here played pawn to c6, trying to be a little bit more solid. And then I played queen c2. You always want to think of playing queen c2. At this point, you are not attacking anything. You're just developing your pieces, putting them on their most active squares. That's what you want to be doing in the opening stage. In this position, I was waiting for knight e5, after which I was going to play bishop d2 and move on with life. With this pawn on g4, should black castle short in the near future, at least I'll be very quick with my attack on the king side, as highlighted. In this position, my opponent played queen a5, adding more salt to the wound, I think. But I just played bishop d2 and pinning my knight to the king. And after knight e4, I knew my opponent was going to lose some material here. Probably a free pawn after knight takes e4, after pawn takes. Guess what? I just took that pawn. And after bishop takes, I took back on d2 with my knight. And in this position, my opponent resigned exactly in 10 moves. Why? Because already in the opening stage, they were down a pawn. And that is all that matters, especially in classical chess. You just want to be up a pawn and start playing positional chess from there. So my opponent lost hope in this position. I had 8 pawns, he had 7. Not to mention that my g pawn was already advanced, so I just had to play h4, g5 and all that. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, I endorse the queen's pawn game, especially if you want to hold strong players in real OTB tournaments. e4 is great, but there are just so many responses that black can play, such as the Sicilian defense, the Piers, the Caro-Kann, the Scandinavian, and all of them might lead to open positions. So if you don't feel like attacking, or if you are not really aggressive or tactically sharp, avoid playing e4 and just play slow chess, which is quiet but aggressive, like the Shabalov attack. Now, time for you to go and check out my new E5 defense course, which I have also linked in the comment section down below. And I'm glad to say, so far it has received a lot of attention and people are getting it like crazy. So it's an opening response that you try against White's E4 opening. You're going to learn how to play against the Scotch, the Ruy Lopez, the Bishop's opening, 3 Knights opening, the 4 Knights game, the Vienna game, even the Italian game. So it's the complete E5 defense course that I just launched with my team. You better go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.